All right. Getting started a couple minutes late tonight. Get myself adjusted here. Okay. Yeah, so this evening, May 8th, 7 p.m., I'm doing this live review. I honestly am not expecting a ton of people to be showing up for this, but anyone who does, I'm so glad to have you here live. And this will obviously stay online for anyone who watches after the fact. So this is a review of material from Unit 3 to help us be thinking already about the Unit 3 exam, which is going to be coming up pretty soon. It's almost the end of the semester, which is kind of hard to believe. I've said this before, but it's like March went super slow, and then April was done like that, and May seems to be going just as quickly. So let's see, what things do I have to say, first of all, about class? So for all of my classes, I went over this in my last email that I sent out this morning. The end of the semester is coming up just in the next couple of weeks. And so just to give you an idea of how things have to work because of when I have to submit grades online. I have to submit grades to CUNY first on May 27th, okay? So that means that I need at least a couple days before that to get grades calculated because I've got 3 classes and that's a lot of stuff to get graded in a short amount of time. So I am saying that everything is due. And I mean, like, I need everything that you want for credit. I need that submitted by Saturday, May 23rd. So if you have a calendar, like, put a big highlighted X in your calendar for May 23rd, because that's like the latest that I can take anything so that I have time to grade it and calculate scores. And then also what I do at the end of the semester is I try to get everything graded as quickly as possible, get scores calculated, and then I email everyone their scores and their grade for the semester, so you know what your grade is going to be before it goes into CUNY first. Okay, so there should be no surprises when it comes to your grade at the end of the semester. So it takes a couple days to sort of get all that worked out. So May 23rd is the absolute last day that I can take anything for credit, and that includes the last exam, which if you're in my hybrid class, we call it the Unit 3 exam. If you're in my Wednesday class, it's the final exam, but it's the same thing. We've been covering the same material in both types of classes. So let's see, yeah, May 23rd, but I'm going to be putting the exam online like almost a week before that, or about a week before that. So you'll have that entire week to decide when is the best time for you to take the exam. And already the 23rd is like several days later than the final exam is scheduled for our classes. So according to Hostos, for my hybrid classes, you're supposed to turn in your final exam on like Tuesday the 19th. And for my Wednesday class, you're supposed to turn your final in on Wednesday the 20th. I'm giving everyone a couple of extra days to get that done. Yeah, so just keep that in your mind. It's coming up soon. It basically means that the Unit 3/final exam is going to open up next Saturday. So in just a little bit more than a week from today. The last exam for all of us is not cumulative, okay? It's only over the last part of the semester. It's only over the stuff that we've covered since the last exam. So you don't need to be worried about going back to archaeology methods or like primates or human evolution stuff. We've already covered all of that. The last exam is just over this last chunk of material that we've been doing completely online. So that includes, I've been sitting in this chair all day long and it's not as comfortable as I would have hoped. So the material that's going to be on the last exam, Linguistic Anthropology, Sex and Gender, Kinship and Group Structure, Ethnicity and Race, Foragers, Cultivation. It's probably not going to be applied anthropology, like there might be a question just like, what is applied anthropology? And then religion. Religion is the last topic that we haven't gotten to yet. I have one more little lecture video that I'm going to be popping up in the next couple of days to complement the material that's already there. But that's going to be our last assignment or our last material that's like for next week's part of the class. Okay. So what I want to do tonight, and anyone who's watching this in real time, you just go ahead and drop any questions that you have into this chat window, into the live chat area, and I'll be able to read them and I can answer your questions in real time. So let me just type a note, ask any questions you have about the Unit 3 material here. Answer them. All right. Yeah, like I said, I don't think this is going to be a ton of people online for this one. But for anyone who is interested, I wanted to go over a little bit about ethnicity and race just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Ethnicity and race, there's not going to be probably a ton of questions on the exam about this, but there are a couple of questions that I can ask you. One of the reasons why I'm not going to be asking you a whole lot of super specific questions about ethnicity and race on the exam is because we could spend an entire semester just talking about ethnicity and race and what ethnicity and race are and how they intersect and what that means in our society. It's an incredibly, incredibly complex topic that we can come at from all sorts of different anthropological angles. Like we can absolutely look at ethnicity and race as cultural anthropologists and look at how these concepts sort of function in our world today, right? Even it's 2020, so it's census time. And if you haven't done the census yet, you should definitely fill out the census. There's important information that needs to be relayed to the people who, fund various programs. I saw something the other day that said, like, if more people had responded in the last census in 2010, New York and like certain areas of New York and certain projects in New York would have received like $9 billion more dollars. Okay, so it's big chunks of money that are on the line that are meant to, help all of us by making sure that money goes where it's needed. So fill out the census if you haven't. Okay, so yeah, just like we could talk about how ethnicity and race is conceptualized through the US Census. And I included this in the ethnicity and race lecture video that I posted last week. If you look at the very first census in 1790, there were 3 racial categories. And even like, do we call them racial categories? We call them ethnic categories. They're racial. I guess I call them racial categories. Yeah, so there were 3 categories. There was white, black, and other. Okay. But then the definitions of those things also changed over time. So like the definition of white changed over time, the definition of black changed over time, and then the definition of other changed over time as other groups were added in. So it was in the 1860s that Asian and Native American became categories on the census, but then what it meant to be Asian, that changed as well, because for a long time, people who were from like India and Pakistan were considered white. But then if you open up the Asian category, then they might be put into that category. And then it changes back and forth a number of times. Latino as a category shows up in 1930. So before 1930, Latinx individuals or people with Hispanic backgrounds were often considered to be white, or if because of America's rules on hypodescent, the so-called one-drop rule, if someone had mixed ancestry, so like Latino blood and also some African ancestry, then they might be considered black. So these are all, like, we can see how the social definitions of ethnicity and race influence how we categorize people. And that's what makes it such an interesting topic, because as we talked about at the beginning of the semester, the concept of race is not rooted in biological truth, right? We can't draw circles around groups of people and say, people within this circle have this one physical characteristic and no one else has it. That's just not how people work. We're a lot more variable. We exist along a gradient. And that's true of our skin color and our hair texture and our facial features and our eye color and our height and our blood types, and everything about us is much more variable than saying like, these people are this, these people are this, and these people are this. So race isn't biologically true, no matter how much people really want to try to prove that it is. It's just not. Race is, however, real in the sense that humans have created it, right? It's a system of trying to organize people that we invented. And so it's a folk taxonomy that we have created, and because we created it, we believe it to be true. So it's a very interesting concept, especially in a place like the United States, especially as we see how these concepts change over time and how they sort of interact in our world. So if we wanted to try to separate the concepts of ethnicity and race, we would say race is supposed to be based on physical characteristics that are shared because of some sort of shared ancestry. But then ethnicity includes like elements of culture. It's where people are from, but also the language that they speak and the religion they practice and the values they have and the music they have and the food that they have. So ethnicity is more the cultural side, and race is meant to reflect the biological side, even though we know that biological side is not really true. Let's see. So in ethnicity, let's see, I'm looking at the definition on my PowerPoint notes here. Ethnicity is identification with and feeling a part of an ethnic group. Okay, so feeling a part of one ethnic group and exclusion from other groups because of that affiliation. So it's kind of like saying, if I'm a part of group A, it means I can't be a part of group B because we've drawn a line between group A and group B. And maybe the difference between us is in group A, we really like xylophones. And in group B, they really like kazoos or something, I don't know. But it's like there's a division between the two. And so being one group means you're not the other group. And then an ethnic group would be people who share those certain beliefs, values, habits, customs, and norms because of their common background. Okay. The thing about ethnic groups, though, is that people can often have more than one ethnic group affiliation. So someone can say, like, I'm group A. Well, let's not use group A. Like there could be, let's say that you're Dominican, right? Like there are going to be some situations where your Dominican identity is the important like ethnic group affiliation. But there might be other situations where being Latinx could be the important identifier, right? So for example, if you're talking about like, I don't know, if you're talking about how like communities are organized in New York or something, then maybe the Dominican part of your identity is the important sort of like community of affiliation that's useful in that particular moment. But if you're talking about like Spanish language education in the United States, then maybe like a shared Hispanic identity or Latinx identity would be the important identity, right? And you can have both of them at the same time. Being Dominican doesn't mean that you're not Hispanic, and being Hispanic doesn't mean that you're not Dominican. Like it's this like shifting, what is it called? It's like I had that term in my PowerPoint notes, and now I'm not remembering it. The social negotiation of identity, right? So yeah, we have more identities than just one, and we can sort of like use them as they are important. I hope that makes sense. Okay. We've got concepts of majority groups and minority groups, because often within societies, and definitely we see this in the world that we have today, that a person's ethnic group affiliation is often tied to some sort of position within like a socioeconomic hierarchy or a sociopolitical hierarchy, meaning that some groups of people who share an ethnic identity will have more power and more wealth, and other people who share an ethnic identity have less power and wealth. So the people who have more power and wealth, those are the majority group, majority. And often the majority group has more numbers. So in the United States, white Americans would be the majority group because they have more numbers and then also hold a disproportionate amount of wealth and power. And then the minority groups would be people who have less wealth, less power, and often less numbers, but it's not always the case. Sometimes you have a majority group that has fewer people. So like in South Africa during apartheid, when you had these very strong legal codes around what races were allowed to do what. In that case, the majority group were the white South Africans, but they actually had a lot fewer people. And then Black South Africans were the minority group, even though there were a lot more of them. But it was because of who was holding the power in those societies. So because there's often like a connection between ethnic groups and the power that they hold, this is also where we see things like prejudice and discrimination coming in. So prejudice is like, let's see, I'll give you the definition so I'm not confusing things. Prejudice is devaluing a group of people because of assumed behavior, values, capabilities, or attributes. So it's stereotyping, right? And it's using someone's, what we believe someone's racial characteristics to be often, but also a person's ethnic characteristics, using that to stereotype individuals according to stereotypes that you have about the group. And then discrimination are the policies and practices that harm a group of people and its members. So I think of it as like prejudice is the idea, and then discrimination is acting on that idea. So prejudice would be, I think this group of people is this way. And then discrimination says, and because I think that this group of people is this way, I'm going to treat them like such and so. There are two types of discrimination, and this would honestly be a great exam question. So there's de facto discrimination and de jure discrimination. De facto discrimination is like, it's not legal, but people do it anyway. And then de jure discrimination is legalized discrimination. So in the United States, when schools were segregated up until like 1954 was when schools had to be desegregated, or when laws passed saying that schools needed to be desegregated. The legal segregation of schools in the United States before 1954 was a form of de jure discrimination. Okay. De facto discrimination, it's like it's illegal in the United States to discriminate against someone based on their race or their ethnicity, but that doesn't mean that discrimination doesn't happen, right? Obviously, there's a lot of discrimination in the United States. It happens all the time. And it's not legal necessarily, but it happens. And, we can find examples of this in our lives and what's going on in the news. It's like sometimes you don't want to like talk about it, but what's going on with like the jogger who was just killed, and the fact that charges weren't brought against the two guys, these two men who waited for this black jogger and then killed him in this altercation. Like the fact that charges weren't brought against these guys until today, I think you could make a case that that's de facto discrimination, right? Where it had been determined for the last 2 months, according to, whoever was going to prosecute or not prosecute this case, they made the decision that some people in that video were acting appropriately and others weren't. And it was based on probably, racial stereotypes or assumptions that they had about who all was in that video. And if you don't, if it's not clear what I'm talking about, that's fine. I actually don't want to try to, get into it too much because it's very fresh. And there are people who are much smarter than I who could speak much more eloquently about it. But De facto discrimination happens constantly in the United States because of our long history of de jure discrimination, right? The fact that discrimination was legal for so long means that it's, it doesn't just go away as soon as it's illegal. Let's see what else. Racial categories, ethnic categories change over time. I went over this in the lecture video. Some really interesting examples of just like who was what race or who was what ethnicity at what point in time. Like the idea that Irish Americans weren't white until like the later 1800s. To me, that's just fascinating. Like, who's whiter than Irish people? And I say that as someone who's like part Irish, but yeah, not white, because whiteness wasn't always about skin color. Whiteness was also about a person's social standing. And, they could use those definitions to like discriminate against certain people in society. Okay, the last key term from, that's not what I wanted at all. The last key term from the ethnicity and race video would be nationalism. Nationalism is, all right, I'll give you again the identity. Nationalism is, I think I just had random words come out of my mouth. I'm not sure. Let me try that again. Nationalism, the definition that's included in the lecture notes. Developing and maintaining a national identity based on shared characteristics such as culture, language, race, religion, political goals, or belief in a common ancestry. Okay, so when we say nationalism is developing and maintaining a national identity, that national identity we can also call a nationality. A nationality is a group of people who sort of want to have authority, not only over their own lives, but typically over some sort of like area of real estate. Like they want to have their own country. They want to have their own territory. Okay, so a nationality is a group of people who go, hey, we are us and we deserve our own space. And then nationalism is the effort to sort of make that space, to promote the interests of that particular group. The really important part of that definition, though, is at the very end, that nationalism is based on these shared characteristics or a belief in common ancestry. So it's not even necessarily that nationalities absolutely do have common ancestry. It's just a group of people who go, yeah, I mean, we're all the same enough, or we're at least, we are all more the same than those guys are. Like they're so different and we're all the same. And so that's why we should be together and they should be over there. Nationalism isn't inherently bad. It isn't inherently good. But it's typically taken to an extreme. It's often taken to an extreme. And that's when things get bad. Or that's when things get hairy at the very least. So, we can see, and I would say nationalism has a negative aspect to it when a group of people in asserting their own, like rights, when they require that other people's rights be stripped. That's when nationalism is bad. So, we have examples of nationalistic movements in the United States. Like we had, Black nationalism in like starting the civil rights movement. That's Black nationalism, but not to the same extreme or intent necessarily as white nationalism. Like they're not the same thing. And don't let anyone tell you that Black nationalism and white nationalism are two sides of the same coin. Because for a lot of Black nationalist groups, like civil rights organizers, but also Black Panthers or the Nation of Islam, it was more about being able to control a person's own destiny, right? And being freed of the discriminatory system that existed within the United States for centuries. So, but still, there are groups that took things, I think objectively you could say maybe took things to some extremes in terms of, trying to assert those rights. And then, of course, there's white nationalism, which has existed for a long time in the United States, and it's come back, stronger than ever. And again, just just recently in the news, we can see white nationalism and how that has intersected with the coronavirus. I mean, a lot of these protests that are going on around the country are, it's not just about go back to work. It's like they're somehow white nationalist protests. And so with that, we see the intersection of how, you know, we know the communities of color are being hardest hit by the coronavirus. And that's a lot to do with the fact that communities of color have been historically the subjects of discrimination, right? We know that that health outcomes are worse for communities of color because there aren't necessarily resources that are available to people. And so you combine these things together, and the conversation is never just about one thing. Again, there are people who are smarter and can speak more eloquently about this. So I should probably stop there, but we can see how, you know, ideas of ethnicity or ideas of race, they don't just start and stop there. They impact, they spider web out into all these other areas of our lives and our cultures and the cultures that we share and interact with each other. So I see comments come in. Please throw some light on nationalism in multicultural countries like India. That is something, I mean, certainly when it comes to India, I cannot do. I do not have the chops, the academic expertise, or even just the anecdotal evidence to appropriately address a subject like nationalism in a place like India. My knowledge is so very, very surface level. But I think, you know, one of the ways that you see nationalism happen in India is around like shared religious identities, right? And you see that in other places where religion is used as a way to unify a group of people and also to push out anyone who's not part of that group. So while I can't speak to India, something similar happened in Turkey about 100 years ago after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, where the Ottoman Empire had collapsed following World War I. And so then there was this, you know, this effort to rebuild the nation of Turkey as this new republic. And one of the first ways that the new Turkish government started to draw lines around their territory was around a shared Muslim faith. So it was like, all right, we know you're Turkish if you're Muslim, and all Turks got to be Muslim. So if you're not Muslim, get out. And that was a way of forcing to the margins or expelling Sephardic Jews, and also people who were Greek Orthodox, because there were a lot of Greeks who were living in Anatolia, in Turkey. So it was like they used their Muslim identity first to say, this is what makes you Turkish. And then as Turkey was turning into a more secular state, they used the Turkish language to draw boundaries around who was Turkish. And again, focused a lot on the Greeks and the Sephardic Jews, saying, if you don't speak Turkish, you got to get out. And so in asserting their nationalism, they also like kind of reinvented the Turkish language in a lot of ways. It was this really interesting process of trying to strip the language of all the loaner words, especially all the Arabic words, because part of being this modern secular Turkish nation was that they weren't going to be religious anymore, and they certainly weren't going to be an Arabic country anymore. They weren't going to be a Muslim country anymore. They were going to be European. So they were like, we got to take out all of the Arabic words that are in Turkish, so that no one thinks that we're Arabic anymore, and people will think that we're European. And I not think, it's not like fooling anyone. They were just trying to assert a more European identity. So they took out all the Arabic words. They tried to take out all the like French and German words that had come in as loaner words as well. And they also switched alphabets. So prior to, like during the time of the Ottoman Empire, the alphabet that was used to write Turkish was the Arabic alphabet. And they were like, no, we're not Arabic. We're Western, we're European. And so they had to bring in this whole new alphabet. But also in a really large country like Turkey, a lot of people weren't literate at that point. And there was a lot of language variation across the country. So they spent like years sending people out all over the country to like collect words to create this new Turkish language, because that was going to be how they said, like, this is what it means to be Turkish. And there's a story, it might be apocryphal, like it might just be this made up story. But there's a story that says that in the Turkish language, so like the Turkish language has some letters that we don't have in English, and it doesn't have some other letters. So the Turkish language has the letter K, but it doesn't have the letter Q. And the story goes that it's because the president at that time, whose name was Kemal, one of his language advisors came to him and they said, how do you want us to write the K sound, like the K sound? And the options are, you can write it as a K or a Q. And so, and I don't know if that's backwards or what for you, but apparently, story goes, he looked at the K and he thought, and especially if it's like the capital K, right, versus like the capital Q, and he was like, no, that one's way cooler, and that's going to be the one in my name, so make it that one. But of course, if he had known what the cursive Q is, which I don't even remember if I can do this from 4th grade, like the cursive Q is like, this big curly Q thing. And maybe if he had seen how pretty it was, then the Turkish language would have Qs instead of Ks. Anyway, you see in that how nationalism used religion and then language to create this shared identity. And that's what nationalism does. It says, we're going to draw a line around who's us. Everyone who's not us is them. Them is often an enemy. And that's certainly what we see in nationalism in the United States today. Okay, so I'm super interested in like the Turkish language reform. It was a really interesting period in Turkish history. So a little bit of a thing over there. Okay, so that's mostly what I wanted to say about ethnicity. You've got these keywords of like ethnicity versus race, which is like the cultural side versus the biological side, even though the biological side isn't that real, it isn't that solid, but that's like where the division is conceptually supposed to lie. But they also often intercede on each other, right? Then you've got the terms prejudice, discrimination, de facto discrimination, de jure discrimination, nationalism. Yeah, I think that's it. If you have any questions about this ethnicity stuff, pop them in here. And, we can study ethnicity as archaeologists as well. We can see how people use things like their personal belongings to sort of assert an ethnic identity. And you can see that even occurring into the past, where it's like, if you're part of this ethnic group, maybe you make your pots in a certain way, or you have a certain type of like arrowhead that you make, or a certain way of tying your arrows. And so like material objects are not just about what they can do, but it's also a way that people would like assert, I'm part of this group and we do things this way. And we don't do things that way because that's how those people over there do it. So people have been setting up these social and ethnic boundaries for a really, really long time. Okay, let's see. Next up. I don't want to say too much about applied anthropology. For those of you who are in my class, which obviously this video is directed to, I don't think there's going to be a lot of applied anthropology on the exam, but maybe a question of just like, what is applied anthropology? And you would say something like, applied anthropology is when we take what we learn in the classroom or we take what we learn in academia and we use it for some real world purpose, right? We use it to solve a problem. So we had a whole section in Unit 2 before the last exam on forensic anthropology. That's a type of applied anthropology because you're taking knowledge of the human skeleton and using it to solve murders, identify people who, whose bodies are unidentified. We use it to figure out cause of death or cause of illness or whatever. But it's using our anthropological knowledge of the human skeleton for a purpose in the world. That's applied anthropology. In archaeology, we called the applied version of it cultural resource management. You think there'd be an easier term for that, since we can call it archaeology, and then it's cultural resource management. Cultural resource management means it's like public archaeology, meaning that, you know, a lot of like the kind of archaeology that I do is it's like for science. It's for a better understanding of what it means to be human. And it's answering questions that are, you know, maybe a little bit esoteric, meaning the rocks that you know I dig up in Africa, probably not going to save anyone's life, not going to change anyone's world. Whatever it is I discover, it's not going to solve a problem in the world. It's not going to address a concern. But cultural resource management is that like problem-solving aspect of archaeology, because one of the main thrusts of cultural resource management is making sure that cultural resources, meaning evidence of, you know, prior groups of people, evidence of their activities, evidence of their history, making sure that that is preserved, that it's understood, and that it's documented before it can be impacted by other human activity, right? So it's like if I want to build a big building somewhere, I need to have cultural resource management groups come and do a survey and maybe a little excavation of that area to make sure that I'm not about to destroy some incredible, you know, tomb structure of the Mississippi mound builders or whatever. So it's a way of making sure that we don't, you know, destroy the cultural heritage of our country, and making sure that it's maintained, and then also helping us learn about our shared history and the prehistory of the country as well. And then, of course, medical anthropology. If you haven't looked at that medical anthropology video that I did with Dr. DeVitra the other day, I seriously recommend it. I know it's a long video. I was going to cut it down, but it was just such a cool conversation that I didn't want to edit it. Medical anthropology is like the place where medicine and culture meet, and it's like you know, it's solving or addressing questions of health and disease and illness, but how that actually interacts with human societies and human cultures. So Dr. DeVitra works on she works with like intimate partner violence and domestic violence. That's been a big thrust of her understanding or her research. But part of it also is that like domestic violence and intimate partner violence can affect communities differently, not because some people are more violent than others, but because resources might be more available in some communities than others, or personal feelings about what domestic violence means or intimate partner violence means. That can also vary from community to community. It's just such a cool subject. So I recommend checking that out. Yeah, so applied anthropology, it's like solving problems with anthropology. It's the cool part that actually serves a purpose, right? Okay. So now like every time I've been doing these review videos, I've been going over that week's material and trying to highlight some of the main points. For this week, the only material was ethnicity and then the applied anthropology stuff. So I don't think that, like, I don't really have anything more on those two subjects unless someone has a question. The one thing that I would like to go over quickly goes back to linguistic anthropology. But if anyone has a question, drop it in the chat and I'll answer it for you. But the only other thing that I really wanted to talk about was linguistic anthropology, because I was noticing with my hybrid classes, in some of the blogs about linguistic anthropology, they were all very good. So let me start there. I loved all of the linguistic anthropology blogs, but for some of them, I felt like there were some points that needed to be refined a little bit or just made a little bit more precise. So I want to go over those three theories about how language and culture and our brains interact, because I want everyone to be very clear about what each of those concepts mean, okay? So In that linguistic anthropology lecture, there was a discussion of the concepts of universal grammar, the critical period hypothesis, and the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. There are lots more theories, lots more hypotheses about how language interacts with culture and also with our brains. It's not like these are the only three. And also, they're not mutually exclusive, meaning it's not that one of them is right and the others are wrong. They can all be right at the exact same time. They could all be wrong at the same time. I don't think they're all wrong at the same time. So these are just three of a whole world full of ideas about how language affects the rest of the world that we live in, okay? But we're going to talk about these three. So the first, universal grammar. Universal grammar says that all humans have the same capacity for language. All of our brains are wired the same way. They have the same architecture for language. So it's not like if you speak Spanish, then here's your Spanish part of your brain. And if you speak French, then here's your French part of your brain. And if you speak Farsi, here's the Farsi part of your brain. All of our brains have the same setup and wiring for language, right? And there's also no like DNA. There's no Spanish DNA. There's no Norwegian DNA that tells us what language we speak. We can speak any language we want to. We speak the language that we grow up with, right? So universal grammar says all of our brains are wired the same way. This is an idea developed by Noam Chomsky, and you don't have to remember his name. He said the evidence for universal grammar are these linguistic forms called pidgins and creoles. A pidgin is a combination of two or more languages. It's really simplistic. It just like picks from each language. And it usually happens when you have two different communities coming together. They each speak a different language, but they have to interact. Like they interact to do business or to trade. You know, people get married. But you're having two groups of people with two different languages interacting with each other over a long time, they're going to start picking up on each other's words. And so it's like, if I'm in the group that only speaks Portuguese and I'm interacting with a group of people who only speak Swahili, every once in a while I'm going to be picking up on, you know, the Swahili words and incorporating them so that my Swahili friends can understand me, even if I'm mostly a Portuguese speaker. So it's like picking bits from each language so that everyone understands. The example that we used before was like if we had English, French, and Spanish speakers all in a group, but we all only spoke one of those languages, I could say like, je walk playa, meaning like I'm walking to the beach. Maybe I want to see if some of my friends want to go with me, but I don't know how to speak Spanish or I don't know how to speak French, but I do know that French people say je when they want to say I do know that playa means beach in Spanish. So if I want to get my French and Spanish friends together, I go, je walk playa, hey, you know, like let's go to the beach. It's not a language. It doesn't have all those components of language that you need, right? It's not a beautiful sentence, I walk beach. But over time, those pidgins, especially as kids grow up learning pidgins and kids grow up speaking pidgins, they start to get fleshed out. And they start to become more complex, and they end up just kind of organically gaining all of those aspects of speech that you would expect in a full language. And so over time, maybe I'm trying to tell my friends, you know, I went to the beach yesterday. I walked to the beach yesterday. So I could say like, je walqueo playa. Like I've made this a past tense sentence, and it's got all those things that you need to have a past tense sentence. I've got like verb agreement. I've got articles or whatever those parts of speech are called. It's now a full language. So when a pidgin, which is just a simplified form of communication, turns into a full language, that's when it becomes a creole. The reason why pidgins and creoles are evidence for universal grammar is because in order for those languages to be mixed together, they have to be created the same way. They have to be organized the same way. So the mere fact that languages can be mixed means that our brains have all the same architecture. You couldn't mix French and English and Spanish if they were all, you know, going on in different parts of your brain. If I only speak English, then I shouldn't be able to use French at all because it would be a different part of my brain if universal grammar were not true. But it's basically a long way around saying all of our brains are organized exactly the same way. Okay, the critical period hypothesis says that we have this window of time for learning a language, and that window starts to close when we're about 7 years old. The older we get, the harder it gets to learn a language. So that window, it's not like it snaps shut as, on our 7th birthday, but it starts to close and it's more and more difficult to get a language in. This is why it's so important. Well, not like anyone's debating this, but if a kid doesn't learn how to use language before the age of 7, it's very difficult for them to gain any sort of proficiency or fluency in that language as a teen or as an adult. If you've taken sociology, you've heard about that girl, Jeannie, who was kept extremely neglected by her parents. She was kept locked away in a dark room for her entire life. And then when she was finally rescued by Children's Protective Services at the age of 12 years old, she did not know how to speak because she had never been around language. Her parents never talked to her. And even though she went into intensive therapy, occupational therapy, once she was removed from the home, she made some progress with language, but basically her brain had never created those language pathways at the time when the brain was first growing. And that made it impossible for them to fully form when she was a teenager and an adult. So language has to come in while our brains are still growing and those pathways are still forming. Otherwise, it's virtually impossible. And of course, any of us who have tried to learn a second language, we know that this is true. The older we get, the harder it is to learn a new language. But kids, you drop them off in a new language and within a week, they got the whole thing down, right? They know the intonation, they know the accent, they've got the hand gestures. Kids are sponges, and that's because their brains are growing. As they're growing, they're building those language pathways. But as we get older, it's harder and harder because that window is closing. So that's the critical period hypothesis. Okay, the last one, Sapir-Whorf. In a lot of ways, this is the toughest one. It's also the most controversial. And a lot of people will say, that doesn't make sense. It's not true. Whatever. I don't know. I think there's something to it. I kind of dig the idea. Sapir-Whorf says that, just very simply, the language you speak influences the way that you think. Okay. So just like culture creates rules for our behavior. This is from the beginning of the semester, right? Culture kind of limits and guides our behavior. It tells us what are the optional things that we can do within our society. And so in that way, it guides us. So in a similar way, Sapir-Whorf hypothesis says that language kind of sets up rules for our brains in terms of how we see the world or how we understand the world. So one way that we could see this is a really cool example would be color. And I mentioned this before, so forgive me for repeating myself. But, not every culture, not every language has the same color words as we do in English. If I asked you how many colors are there, I don't know, what is it, 64? How many crayons are in a box of, a Crayola box, 64. But we've got our main colors, red, orange, yellow, blue, purple, black, brown, white, gray, right? Cool. But some languages don't have all that many colors. They've got black, white, red, blue, yellow. Or some languages have black, white, red, blue. Or some languages have black, white, red, green. And that's it. And some languages just have dark, light, and red. Now, it's not that their eyes can't see those colors. Their eyes look just like mine, just like yours. They've got the same cones and rods or whatever's going on in there. It's just that the language only has words for those 3 colors. And so a person who speaks those languages would then see the world as just shades of those 3 colors. So it would mean what if I got this envelope right? I call this a purple envelope, and I call this a green water bottle. But if the only words that exist in my language are light, dark, and red, is this light or dark or red? I'm going to say it's light. And this, I'm going to say this is light as well. So since both of these things are light, they're now the same color. That's kind of wild, right? That your language would say, yeah, same. They're matching, same color. But it's because the words influence perception of the world. So, you know, and a lot of people say, no, that's not true. The human brain is a lot more creative than that. And if we really needed to you know, have more ideas, like we could just think them up. And then because we have this thing called productivity in language, we could just make up new words for the new ideas we have. And so the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis isn't true. Maybe, but we can also see how, you know, the words that we use can influence how we understand or how we imagine the world to be. I'll give you one more example. And again, I believe this to be true. If you know that I'm 100% wrong, please let me know so that I never repeat this wrong piece of trivia again. But here's my trivia. In many languages, as you know, there are feminine and masculine words, right? Not so much in English, but in Spanish and French and the Romance languages and a lot of other languages, there's masculine and feminine. In the languages where the word bridge is masculine, people describe bridges as being strong and trustworthy and sturdy. In languages where the word bridge is feminine, bridges are described as sleek and graceful and streamlined. That's wild, right? So just because the word bridge in that language is either masculine or feminine, it changes how people see the thing. Because they're like, oh, that's a bridge. And I know that people aren't saying that's a boy bridge or that's a girl bridge. But because it has the feminine and masculine, there's something about that that's like seeped in. And so it's like, this is a feminine word. I therefore am going to see it associated with feminine characteristics. Or, oh, this is a masculine word. I'm going to see that associated with masculine characteristics. That's Sapir-Whorf, right? Because the language you speak influences how you see the world. And that's, I think it's such an interesting concept. It's just, it's so wild, so cool. Okay, so those are the three theories of how language interacts with brain and culture that I really wanted to just stress and refine a little bit, because I saw a lot of good stuff in the linguistic anthropology blogs for my hybrid class, but there were some instances where I thought that like definitions or examples needed to be tweaked just a little bit. Okay. All right. So I see a question has just come in. Can you talk a little bit about the extra credit? Absolutely. So for the students in my class, if you're not in my class, but you're watching this because it's a fun thing to do on Friday night, it's totally fine. You don't have to worry about doing the extra credit. But for all of my students, so let me start by saying anything that you want to turn in, I will still take. I've been getting more and more emails just in the last like couple of days from people saying like, hey, can I still turn in this work? I know I haven't turned this thing in. Is it all right if I turn it in? Yes. The answer is just yes. Blanket yes. Okay. Because of all of the craziness of this semester, everything that's been going on, personally and in the city and with distance learning, yes, I will take everything you want to turn in. It doesn't matter if it's from the beginning of the semester. Give me all of your things so that I can give you all of the points. Okay. The only hard deadline that we have, like hard deadline, is May 23rd, with the exception of revisions on the exam. I want those by this Sunday so that I can then open the exam up and you can see all of the correct answers. Okay. And you can use that to help study for the last exam. Extra credit. There are a number of extra credit opportunities that are still on the table for you. There's the Nicaraguan Sign Language extra credit quiz. That's worth up to 6 points. If you haven't done it and you want to try for those 6 points, do it. I'll take it. There's the Forensic Anthropology extra credit blog. If you want to try for those possible 6 points, do it. I'll take it. Then there is the Applied Anthropology summary. That's the one that I just posted the other day. For that assignment, it's really open. There's not one right way to do it, but basically I want you just to do a little bit of research on one particular field of applied anthropology. So I put the textbook chapter, I linked it with the applied anthropology stuff in Blackboard. It's like in the old chapters of the textbook, it was chapter 18. But anyway, it's the PDF that says applied anthropology. Take a look at that book chapter because it describes several different types of applied anthropology, like cultural resource management or medical anthropology or business anthropology or education anthropology. And then pick one type of applied anthropology that either you find interesting or that you think like has some sort of interaction, or it could have an interaction with the career that you want to have. So for example, if you want to be a doctor or you want to go, into the dental program or whatever it is, maybe you want to pick medical anthropology. That seems like a really good crossover. Or if you're an entrepreneur and you're like, I got an idea for a business and I'm going to make millions, then look at business anthropology. Or, maybe you're just like, I love living in the city and all the unique things that come from being in this particular environment, then look at urban anthropology. So read that section of the book chapter and then just do a little poking around online. And I'm open in terms of what resources you use. There's tons of stuff on YouTube where people have talked about different types of anthropology. So, find some articles, find some YouTube videos, whatever it is about that type of applied anthropology. And then what I want you to give to me is like 250 words. It can be more, but I want at least 250 words summarizing what that field of applied anthropology does, and like how it interests you as it relates to, your career goals. Okay. I hope that makes sense. If anyone is confused about what I mean by that, or if you have an idea but you're not quite sure how to follow it up or if you should follow it up, send me an email and I can help get you where you need to be. Okay. I put a suggested deadline of this Sunday for the applied anthropology extra credit. But I'll take it on Monday and I'll take it on Tuesday and I'll take it all the way up to the 23rd. Okay. So I put those deadlines on things just to try to keep us moving forward so that everything doesn't get piled up at the end. But I will take it certainly after that point. Okay. Shoot, there was one more thing I was just going to say about that. And I totally forgot what it was. But the deadline, I have no idea. I don't remember. Okay, then let me say this. Just so you know, I think I'm getting to the point of wrapping up, unless people have questions. So if you do have questions, pop them in there right now, so that I don't sign off before I answer them. Okay. A note about the Blackboard Grade Center. So just a couple hours before I started this live stream, I went into the Grade Center for each of the classes and I created columns in the Grade Center that gives you the percentage that you have in this class and also your grade as of right now. Okay, so it might be out of date tomorrow, but as of today, May 8th, for all of the work that I've graded, it gives you your current score. I did that because Blackboard, the way that it calculates grades and with the weighted totals and it displays things in a super wonky way that's not really useful if you're, a student trying to figure out what your grade is in the class. So your percent and your letter grade are in Blackboard. And I will try to update that let's say every other day rather than every day. But as work comes in, I will try to keep those updated so you have a basic idea. But if you want specifics about your grade, email me, I can give you exact information on what your grade is, where you can get more points, how your grade can come up, whatever information you need along those lines. Okay? Okay. Mm-hmm. And let's see what else. We are going to, I'll do some more review videos next week as we are heading into Unit 3 exam. Like I said, I think that's going online next Saturday. So in like 8 days, the Unit 3 exam will be online. If you are feeling super prepared and you just want to get it done and over with so you never have to think about it again, then you will be able to get the exam done by next Saturday. There's also going to be one little extra bit of extra credit at the end there, okay? And I'll explain that later. So what am I trying to say? I think, I don't know if everyone else's brains are doing this. I'm having a hard time like picking a topic to focus on. It just kind of bounce off the walls. I'll have more reviews next week, probably a couple of them. I'll probably keep this time slot, Friday night, 7 p.m., but I'll also do, like maybe I'll do one on Thursday, do another one on Saturday. I can do one like earlier next week. Don't forget, I have my online office hours, Tuesdays 1 to 2 and 5 to 6, and then Wednesdays 2 to 3. I am always sitting in front of my computer for those office hours. So if you need to catch me, if it would be easier to talk to me, if it's just chat or actually face-to-face, that's where you can do that through Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. Yeah, I think that's all I've got, my friends. I think that's all I've got. Any last little bits for tonight? I'm afraid I'm going to be really annoying and be like emailing everyone every day for the next 2 weeks. So I apologize in advance. I just really want to make sure that everyone gets what they need, that everything's very clear. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay, well, I think we're good to go. I'm going to go ahead and close down this little live stream. Thank you, though, to those of you who stuck around for this whole thing or who jumped in. It's nice to not be talking just to completely no one. I hope you all have a wonderful Friday night. I hope you have a great weekend. I hope things are just looking better. I really hope things are looking better. And let me know if there's anything I can do to be of assistance to you. I'm going to be shooting emails to a bunch of folks, just like checking on some work. Don't let it be a stress, and I will talk to you soon. Okay. All right. Have a good night. Bye.